Ramsey home in Boulder, Colorado was a vision of holiday warmth on the evening of December 25, 1996. Twinkling lights adorned the grand house, a lavishly decorated Christmas tree stood proudly in the living room, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and baked goods. 6-year-old JonBenét, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed beauty queen with an infectious smile, had been the heart of the family's celebration. She had spent the evening playing with her new presents, a bright spark of joy among the holiday festivities. Nobody in the house could have foreseen that this Christmas would be her last. When the sun rose the next morning, the Ramsey household was thrown into chaos. It was still dark when Patsy Ramsey, JonBenét's mother, awoke and made her way down the spiral staircase. As she reached the bottom, a chilling sight awaited her. A handwritten ransom note sprawled across 3 pages, demanding $118,000 for the safe return of her daughter. The letter was peculiar. It was an unusually long ransom note, containing phrases such as, "We are a small foreign faction, and if we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies." The demand for precisely $118,000 struck investigators as odd, as it happened to match John Ramsey's Christmas bonus from work. Panic surged through Patsy as she screamed for her husband. The moment her shrill cries echoed through the house, John bolted from his bed. Together they rushed to JonBenét's room, but their daughter was nowhere to be found. In a desperate attempt to secure help, Patsy dialed 911. Her voice trembled as she told the operator, "We have a kidnapping, hurry please." The police arrived within minutes, but their presence would do little to preserve the crime scene. In the chaos that ensued, neighbors and friends arrived, unknowingly trampling over crucial evidence. Authorities began searching the house, but initially there were no obvious signs of forced entry. The windows were locked, and the doors had been secured overnight. The ransom note had instructed the Ramseys not to contact the police, yet they had done so immediately. This raised further suspicions. Why would a kidnapper leave a lengthy, detailed ransom note inside the house and then not follow up with any further communication? The case was already unraveling into a tangled web of inconsistency. As the hours dragged on, a detective suggested that John Ramsey search the house again. This decision would lead to one of the most chilling discoveries in true crime history. John, accompanied by his friend Fleet White, made his way to the basement. He turned the handle of a little-used door and stepped inside. What he saw would haunt him forever. There, lying lifeless on the cold concrete floor, was JonBenét's body. He was wrapped in a white blanket, her tiny hands bound with a cord, and a garrote fashioned from a paintbrush handle tightly coiled around her neck. Duct tape covered her mouth, silencing a scream that had never been heard. John let out a guttural cry as he lifted her into his arms and carried her upstairs, sobbing. The police were now dealing with a homicide, not a kidnapping. But in the chaos of John's discovery, crucial forensic evidence may have been compromised. The body was moved, the basement had been disturbed, and the crime scene was no longer preserved. What had begun as a search for a missing child had become one of the most baffling murder mysteries in American history. The news spread rapidly, and within hours, the quiet town of Boulder became the center of a media storm. Cameras flashed, reporters swarmed the neighborhood, and the Ramsey home became a crime scene like no other. Despite the flood of investigators, the unanswered questions only grew. Who had done this? Why had they done it? And most haunting of all, was the killer still out there, walking free? The nightmare had only just begun. Boulder police quickly found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer complexity of the case. From the very beginning, their handling of the crime scene had been disastrous. Officers had allowed multiple people to enter and leave the house freely, contaminating potential evidence. Even more troubling, the basement where JonBenét's body was found had not been searched thoroughly during the initial police sweep. This meant the young girl's body had lain undiscovered for hours, even while officers were inside the home. Investigators immediately noticed several puzzling details. The autopsy report later revealed that JonBenét had suffered a severe skull fracture, but she had also been strangled with a homemade garrote. This raised a disturbing question. Had she been struck first and then strangled to make the attack look like an intentional murder? The medical examiner also found evidence that suggested sexual assault, though this detail remains widely debated among experts. The nature of her injuries suggested a level of brutality that did not align with the typical motives of a home intruder. Then there was the ransom note. Handwriting analysis was inconclusive, but some experts believed there were similarities between the note and Patsy Ramsey's handwriting. The letter was excessively long and oddly detailed, unlike typical ransom demands, which are usually short and direct. Additionally, the note had been written using a notepad and pen found inside the Ramsey home, suggesting that the writer had taken time to compose it rather than bringing a pre-written message. This led many to suspect that the ransom note was staged. Despite the strange details, the investigation quickly turned into a media circus. The Ramseys' behavior only fueled suspicions. Instead of cooperating fully with police, they hired high-profile attorneys and public relations specialists. This made them appear as though they were hiding something. Why would innocent parents act so defensively? Some believed their reluctance stemmed from genuine grief and distrust of the police, but others saw it as a calculated move to shield themselves from prosecution. The police remained divided on whether JonBenét's murder was an inside job or the work of an unknown intruder. The lack of forced entry suggested that the killer may have already been inside the house. Some investigators pointed to the open basement window as a possible entry point, but others argued that an intruder would have left more evidence, such as footprints in the fresh snow outside. The conflicting narratives made the case even more difficult to solve. Years later, DNA analysis would add another layer of complexity. A small, unidentified DNA sample was found on JonBenét's clothing. It did not match any family members, raising the possibility of an unknown assailant. Yet despite this revelation, no arrests were made. The DNA was not enough to identify a suspect, and it was unclear whether it had been left by the killer or was simply the result of secondary transfer. The mishandling of the crime scene and the conflicting evidence meant that JonBenét's case would remain unsolved. The media frenzy only made things worse, turning the investigation into a spectacle rather than a search for justice. The Ramseys continued to profess their innocence, but the public remained divided. With each passing year, the hope of finding JonBenét's killer grew fainter. Despite the mistakes, the lies, and the unanswered questions, one thing was certain. This was a crime that would never be forgotten. The town of Boulder, once peaceful, had become the epicenter of one of America's most infamous cold cases. Over the years, countless theories have emerged, each more shocking than the last. One of the most debated is the intruder theory. Some believe an unknown assailant broke in through a basement window and killed JonBenet. The DNA evidence supported this, yet there was no clear sign of forced entry. Could the attacker have been someone familiar with the house? Then there's the family theory, which suggests someone inside the home was responsible. Some speculated that JonBenet's older brother, Burke, accidentally killed her in a fit of anger. Others believed Patsy, possibly frustrated with JonBenet wetting the bed, unintentionally struck her daughter, leading to a panicked cover-up. The garrote, however, indicated premeditation, not an accident. A lesser-known but chilling theory involves a local man named Gary Oliva, a convicted pedophile who was in Boulder at the time of the murder. He later made disturbing statements about JonBenet, claiming her death was an accident. However, his DNA did not match the unidentified sample found at the scene. As forensic technology advanced, investigators revisited old evidence, yet no breakthrough emerged. With conflicting narratives, inconclusive DNA results, and a deeply divided public, the case seemed to be at a standstill. Would the real killer ever be found? Or was JonBenet's case doomed to remain an unsolved mystery? For years, the Ramseys lived under a cloud of suspicion. Accused of either killing their daughter or covering up the crime, they endured relentless media scrutiny. Their every move was dissected. Patsy's tearful interviews, John's composed demeanor, Burke's unsettling smirks in later interviews. In 1999, a grand jury convened to determine whether the Ramseys should be indicted. After extensive review, they recommended charging John and Patsy with child abuse leading to death, but the district attorney declined to proceed, citing insufficient evidence. The decision left the public divided. Was this proof of a botched investigation, or a sign that the Ramseys were innocent all along? Patsy fought a long battle with ovarian cancer, passing away in 2006, still proclaiming her innocence. John continued to push for new leads, though he retreated from the public eye. Burke, the once silent sibling, later gave an awkward interview that only fueled speculation. Despite DNA evidence clearing them in 2008, the family's name remained synonymous with one of America's most baffling murder mysteries. Even as the years passed, JonBenét's case refused to fade. Documentaries, books, and investigative specials kept the story alive. Yet for all the theories, expert opinions, and renewed DNA analysis, one haunting question remained unanswered. Who really killed JonBenét Ramsey? More than 2 decades later, JonBenét's case remains one of the most infamous unsolved crimes in history. Advances in forensic science have cracked decades-old cases, yet her murder remains a riddle wrapped in tragedy. In recent years, DNA databases have led to high-profile arrests, such as the Golden State Killer. Could this technology finally unmask JonBenét's killer? Some investigators believe that new testing on the DNA sample could reveal a match, bringing long-awaited justice. But beyond the forensic puzzles, the case's legacy endures in deeper ways. It changed the way child murders were investigated, exposing flaws in police procedures and the dangers of media sensationalism. It also left an indelible mark on American culture, inspiring countless true crime documentaries, theories, and debates. JonBenét Ramsey was more than a case. She was a little girl who never got to grow up. Beneath the pageant crowns and headlines was a child whose life was stolen far too soon. The mystery surrounding her death may persist, but one truth remains unshaken. JonBenét deserves justice. Until the day her killer is identified, her story will haunt the world, a chilling reminder that even in the most picture-perfect homes, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface.